Welcome. This is session 2 of our series for the web mapping workshop. If you want to go ahead and head to DUSPviz/webmap workshop, you'll find the homepage where we're at. We are actually on session 5, and this is JavaScript, the mapper's introduction. And yeah, we'll work from there. The first thing that you're going to want to do is download the materials. So if you have it already, that's great. If not, if you click, you'll see, or if you click on the page, you'll see a download the workshop materials. You can click download zip. And unzip that. We'll get rid of one of these so we're consistent here. And we're looking at Web Map Workshop Master, which doesn't have anything in it. Is that a problem? Okay. Let's try this one more time. Okay, there we go. So we're going to be working in the folder number 4 right here, JavaScript for mappers. This session is actually pretty long. It was initially designed to be 2 sessions. What we'll do is we'll go through at least the first part, and you guys can try the second component on your own, and just don't hesitate to ask me questions as you go. What the session works through and creates is it's going to show you how to use JavaScript, kind of give you an introduction to JavaScript, and the product that you're going to make is going to be a map. Let me scroll down until I see it here. It's going to be a map that has some toggles and filters. And some various interactivity that you're going to add. So right here we're looking at a map of Cambridge. We have a coffee shop data set. We can show them all, hide them all. We toggle them. Look at Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts. This one's actually not fully functional. Let's take a quick peek down here. So we use show all. Should show both, hide all. Toggle all, Starbucks, Dunkin' toggle all, etc., etc. Essentially, we're going to create this map and use JavaScript functions to make this happen. How of the you folks here, how many of you guys have done some JavaScripting before? Yeah, that's totally fine. This is designed to introduce you guys. So. Let's go ahead and get started. So what I will actually do as well, when we finish this up, there's a JavaScript exercise that I wrote this semester for the Big Data course that in some ways kind of supersedes this. However, this is much more of a focus on mapping. So I'll send you guys that as a resource to refer to going further. But what this does is going to introduce JavaScript. It's going to talk about what functions are, what variables are, kind of basically what it's doing, how it's operating in the context of a leaflet map. So JavaScript is a web programming language that manipulates and controls the behavior of web pages by interacting with the various elements on the page and loading data. JavaScript is essentially the way that you make your web page interactive. You make it call other items. You make it. It's the way that you can make it dynamic and do things, if you will. It, along with HTML and CSS, forms the foundation of the modern web browser, and it kind of sits at the foundation of the internet. It's a really popular language. If you guys have a lot of website templates and frameworks are built in JavaScript. A lot of data visualization libraries are built in JavaScript. D3, for example, is a JavaScript library. And it is also the programming language for most major mapping libraries at the moment. Leaflet is just one of them. We're going to look at Leaflet. If you're also interested, you can look at something called OpenLayers. OpenLayers is made by the same group that makes QGIS. So OpenLayers is actually a really nice library to dig into as well. How does JavaScript operate? JavaScript primarily operates and changes web pages on the client side, which is your computer, not the server from which you access the page. So you can think of it in your head as when you're sitting at your laptop, when you navigate to, when you navigate to a page, your computer is essentially going across the network and requesting files from the server that's within your page. Anything that's brought back to your computer would be something that comes client side. So the server side is where your website's sitting. Client side is your laptop right here. So a server would be, it could be a room not too dissimilar to this, but full of giant computer towers that are just simply sending web pages out to the web. When you navigate to a website, your computer will go and find that page and then request information from it. So the way that we're going to be using JavaScript is we're essentially going to use it to request information, and it's going to bring it all to the client. There are ways that you can set up JavaScript to have it work on the server, but that's a little bit beyond the scope of this at the moment. There's a specific way that web pages must be structured to allow for script interaction, and this is known as the DOM, or the Document Object Model. It can be described in two ways. It's a representation of the document as a structured group of nodes and objects, and it's also kind of the space in which you are interacting with your web page. A web page is a document, so your browser is going to be interpreting this document, reading the code, and then performing the task based on what the code tells it to. If we were looking at a really simple conceptual web page right here, this is kind of your standard tags for various content places of the elements of your page. The DOM would look something like that for this page. So essentially, you'll notice this is also what you would use to style CSS. The DOM can be kind of an abstract concept when you're first working with it, but it's essentially the nesting that's used for all of the elements on your page. So when you're working with JavaScript, Leaflet, for example, or CSS, you're going to be wanting to access pieces of it by saying, I would like to go to this div and to this paragraph and do something to it. Or maybe change the color, or have that be my button, or something. So organization of JavaScript. JavaScript is a scripting language, meaning it's designed to complement, expand, and extend a host application, which our host application is going to be a web page. So it's essentially built into a web page. JavaScript doesn't necessarily stand completely on its own, but it allows you to run scripts on your page. It's an object-based language, meaning that you can create objects such as variables, menus, data sets, or even maps, charts if you're using D3, that exist within the context of your HTML and CSS that can then be referred to and manipulated. When you start developing web apps using Leaflet here, you're going to want to use JavaScript initially to do these couple of things. You're going to want it to create objects. You're going to want it to set variables. Those would be like the containers for storing objects. You're going to want it to modify object properties. So the properties could be the location on the page. It could be the color of the points on the map. It could be those types of things. You want to write functions, and those are going to be little blocks of code, such as what happens when you press a button. You want to listen for events. An event is what happens when your user performs an action on the page, such as a click or a mouse over. So those are called events, and JavaScript can set up listeners for them. In our document, there's two main ways you're going to write JavaScript code. The first is to add your code directly into the browser, or sorry, directly into your HTML document. The second is you can actually link to an external file. What we are going to be looking at here is just, I think most of today we're just going to be writing it right within our HTML document. So let's begin. So if you've gotten the data package, that's awesome. Unzip it and put it in an easily accessible place. And that's where we'll be grabbing some files from. If you want to go ahead and open up, which one is it? map1.html. Make this a little bit smaller, easier to read here. So if you open up map1, and I'm going to use Sublime Text, which you can use. Actually, how about let's use Text Wrangler, because everyone has that. Text Wrangler. What you're going to see here is a really, really simple, basic leaflet map. There we go. Let's do there we go. So what you're going to see here is a really, really simple leaflet map. It's going to look fairly straightforward. What we do is, this is our website page outline here. Here's our head, here's our body. Our script is all going to go right in here. And this is where we're going to write all of our leaflet code. If you're doing D3, this would be where you're writing all your D3 code, right? So we're calling this library. This could also go up in the head if we wanted to. Then we have our style sheet. The style sheet actually contains all the default styles for leaflet. And then we have two divs right here that one of them we're calling map. So we're turning this one into a map, and this one we're going to put some buttons in. So we have just kind of a basic setup for a page. If you want to see how this is looking, go ahead. And if we open this up using Google Chrome, possibly. Doesn't seem to know where to go. All right. Not cooperating with me. But what we're looking at here essentially is just a really basic sticky map. So what this file is containing is, let's scroll down just a little bit, we're looking at a map that is simply just like this at the moment. So next we can dig into JavaScript a little bit. So let's see if I can set these uploads side by side here so we can see these. All right, so you'll notice when we are referring to, so JavaScript supports something called chaining or nesting. What we're actually referring to is our library, and then methods within that library by separating them by periods. So to illustrate this using a map object, we're going to use the leaflet library, which is signified by an L. If you're using D3, this is actually a D3, or if you're using jQuery, this would be a $. And we're going to then initialize an element with the ID of map using the map class from D3. We're going to signify the HTML, which that signifies the HTML element that's going to be given a map, returned to a map. And we're setting some of the options. So that's what this line is actually doing here. And what we're illustrating here is how you can access different properties. So leaflet is a giant object, and map is an object within that object. So it's a complicated thing to explain. Object, but I'll explain. I'll continue. I guess I'll explain that in just a second here. Okay. So have you guys worked with objects before in programming? Okay, a little bit. Well, do you want to try to Carrie explain what it is? Put you on the spot.
No, actually.
Fair enough.
Can I try?
Yeah.
I probably will butcher this. But an object is something that you first define and then you can call later on. And then it's...
You can assign lots of different attributes
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah.
More or less. Object is kind of a generic term. You can assign, it basically is, what's the best way to describe it? It's kind of a container for your bits of code that you can then put other containers in, which you can put containers within those containers. So maybe container might not be the right term, but maybe that can help you visualize it a little bit. So for leaflet example, when we call the leaflet library, leaflet is just basically a big JavaScript document that contains all of these other sub objects. This could be like you're looking at a data set, and it could be like Massachusetts would be a state. Within that state, you'd have cities. Within that city, you would have I don't know, zip codes. So when we're working with leaflet, we have our big general leaflet library. Within that, we're going to have a bunch of different objects that will do different things in the library. Map is the kind of the main one, and map is what turns an element on our page into a map. We can then use an object called tile layer to add a base map to our map. We can also use another object called like a marker to add a marker to our map. And there's basically all of these other objects we can interact with to manipulate the library in various ways. But they're kind of methods within methods, or containers within containers of code, if you will. So what I'll suggest that you guys actually do for this next little piece here is if you go to a site called rdpl.it. This is a JavaScript console that you can interact with on your kind of separate of your document here. And this is going to be where we're going to get into JavaScript a little bit. So, introducing objects. We're going to continue to explain what we were just talking about right there. Objects are the kings of JavaScript, if you will. And almost everything you work with in JavaScript is an object. So objects are elements of JavaScript that have properties and values. So a really nice way to illustrate this is to look at a car, for example. A car could be an object. And within that, the car is going to have various properties. So the car could be, it's going to have a name. It could be like a Fiat, a model, 500, a weight, a color, what else could there be there? Four-wheel drive, or basically other properties, other characteristics about this car. A method would be something that you can do to that car, such as start, drive, brake, or stop. So these are essentially variables that you can set. And these are also, these are actually properties, but stored within these properties are functions. So when you call that property, it will actually run a block of code that you've designated to only be run when this is called. So in our map example, we're working with an object from the leaflet library, and then we're setting some of the properties, such as the zoom and the center. So that's kind of how that's working right there. So classes don't really exist. We're all kind of working with is objects here, but you're going to hear the term class referred to from time to time. JavaScript is very good at breaking its own language rules. But yes, so when you're working with Leaflet, there's a library here of documentation. So this will kind of talk about the various objects within the Leaflet library. Map is the main one. But here would be some methods that you could do to map. Which, say you wanted to modify the map state. You set view, and that would run a function that would take latitude and longitude, and then set the map to that view. So introducing objects, that's kind of what we're doing right there. The next thing we're going to talk about here is variables and data types. So variables are containers that hold data values. If you've done some Python or some other, Java or other scripting languages before, or basically programming before, you're going to recognize this. So in this next little step, you can actually test out some of these using the REPLIT, the Replit library, and we're going to do some basic arithmetic with this here. So you notice all individual lines in JavaScript must end with a semicolon, and what we're essentially just doing is not even glorified algebra, just super basic algebra here. And we're using these, each one of these, we're actually turning into an object. We're just giving that one value. But you can refer to those at a later point. So data types, these variable values, so we set a variable by saying var, followed by the value that we want to set, followed by the actual, followed by the name of variable, followed by the value that we want to set. There we go. These variable types are going to fall into two different data types, primitive and reference. Data in JavaScript are objects that represent values of other objects. Primitive data types must be a specific type. So that would just be like creating a variable and saying it's going to be an array. Whereas a reference data type is a reference to other objects in your document. A reference data type could be a variable that holds a function that is using something somewhere else in your document. The primitive data types, there's Boolean, which essentially evaluate to true or false. Number, any integer, or floating point. You can do some basic math. You can do some really complicated math too, using that. And you can combine the two together. There's a string. Text characters are limited by quotes. So if you were to encapsulate your variable with quotes, it would be saved as a string. Then you can actually create null or undefined variables that you will set, but you're not going to give a value to. And the reason you'll want to do this is so you can use it later. And I'll talk about scope in a second here. Yeah, you can go ahead and just try some of these out. These are just some of the various data types that you'll be working with. when you're using JavaScript. You will notice, actually, if you wanted to combine two items together, say, even with strings, you can use a plus. So if we were to do combo, it drops an A after my name. Numbers operate pretty similarly. The total equals count times cost. Boolean values, those are essentially set to true and false, and these actually can be something let's see if this will actually go for this would just be something that you would evaluate true or false in an example. So an example of how you could use a Boolean value would be something like this, right? So if we were to throw this into our console, you enter a value false because 9 is not greater than or equal to 10. Or 10 or 11 greater than or equal to. It's true. So you're going to use these Boolean values essentially to guide. This is going to be how you're going to set up conditionals, and you set up how people flow through your code, or how the machine flows through your code. You can set up a for loop that will only run while the condition that you state is true. You can set up a while loop or an if loop that will also check those options. Null values or null variables can simply be set using something like the following here. So I play and I set object, it's not going to equal to anything. Null object can be created if you need an object, but you don't have anything to put it in at the moment. You can populate it later. And see some of the other examples here. You can go ahead and try those out. Arrays are an important component, and I guess arrays are actually a reference data type. I mentioned that it was primitives earlier. But arrays are kind of your first foray into the reference data type. So if we set a variable equal to array1, and this can be a really basic data set right here. If we wanted to print that, we could type in the name of the array. If we wanted to access various elements of it, you can use a bracket. Oops, I need array1. Use a bracket and then put in the value of the location of the array that you want to go. What's important about arrays is to remember your first value starts at 0. And then they'll go up from 0 to 1 to 2 and onwards. But arrays, this is how you're going to be, this is how JavaScript is going to start working with data for you. Data sets in JavaScript form are essentially really, they're essentially large arrays when you get down to it. And then we have the object literal type. Oops. Like this. So this would be setting a variable named workshop. If we typed in workshop, we could get the values there. I want to get the specific pieces of it. So I think you guys get the idea. So variable scope. When I create a variable, how long can I use it and where can I use it? There are two main types of variables, global variables and local variables. Variables declared within a function are local to that function, and values held within a local variable will not be usable after the function ends. If variables declared outside a function are global, and they can be used absolutely anywhere. This is actually a really important concept right here. And one of the big things that you're going to run into as you get into JavaScript is why is that variable undefined? Chances are you're trying to access it in a location that does not have access to it. So if we had a simple function here, just called my function, and within here we had a variable named car name, if I had, and we declared it right here, if I had another line of code out here that wanted to use car name, I wouldn't be able to. Because it's local within just this function that you can use car name. If we set up a null variable out here called var car name, and then we just set car name equal to something in here, we can then refer to it. And that's kind of illustrated here. If we set up car name outside of this function, we can use it in both locations. Why would something like scope matter? And why shouldn't you just have the variables available anywhere when you declare them? Any thoughts on that?
Maybe you're using just like single letter variables that you want to be able to use in places.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe you just have a variable that you really only need right here. You know, it could be like, I have a variable A, B, and C, and I just want to use them within this function. They don't need to be used anywhere else in the code. So, yeah, that's exactly one of the reasons. So essentially, it'll just be variables that you want to access globally throughout your program. You're going to want to set to be outside of a function. If you have a variable that's just working within a function, it doesn't matter. You can keep it within there. And that can actually help you keep your code a little bit cleaner. It's not going to matter. See, you could have two functions, my function 1 and my function 2, and you could declare the same variables in them to use those two of them, but maybe you want to be able to use them outside of those functions. So scope is kind of the just where you can use your variables. So I would like to view this map in Chrome here, but I don't know if it's going to let me for some reason. Maybe I will start up a Python server. So let's do that. Are you guys all using Macintosh?
I'm using Windows.
Okay. That should be, I think that should be fine. Let's see here. Let's just. I'd like to display our map here. So I didn't expect you guys to follow up to do that as rapidly as I was doing right there. You guys can just kind of follow along on the screen if you want. What I did was I just started up the simple localhost server that we used last week as well, and created just this basic web map here. Do you want me to help you get that set up?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So your downloads folder, it's in downloads. So CD downloads. Type in ls and see where that actually goes.
This is remove to paste.
CD web map workshop master. We might need to unzip it here.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So you actually have that already. So if we go CD for JavaScript methods. So now coming here with a local host 1000, we can type in map one. There's a map. So now when you update your code here, you'll see it reflect in that same spot. Okay.
Yeah, I know this last week, I forgot.
Yeah, it's a little complicated. It's kind of annoying, but it'll make your life a little bit easier. So, some downloads.
I did DUSPviz. I can also give you the address.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know where that is.
It's just here. Between 16 and then it's DUSPviz.
DUSPviz. Oh, okay. So Dropbox. So type in CD. Oops. And then you CD, and let's put this in quotes. So I'm using because your Dropbox has a space in it.
Oh,
Dropbox. Here, and then once you're in that application, we'll start with that.
is it file written in Python? Is that why you tell it?
No, so we're actually, the only thing that we're using Python for is to start our simple server.
Yeah.
So try it one more time. There you go. So Python, the reason that I've been doing this on Macs with people is Python is actually natively installed on the Mac and you can just work with it. Windows is, I don't know why Windows is just, Microsoft is just being difficult. So, so I'll give you a little full disclaimer here. We're actually not going to get through everything, like I mentioned, but hopefully I can give you some direction to run with, and then we can maybe continue it next week. So, we've been looking a little bit at our JavaScript here, and looking at our basic math, which is right here. This is where we are setting up our map. So the following, we have these already in the file. We create our map elements, and we use the map object in the lethal library in the map object to do that. And then we're adding a tile layer So you notice this is the tile layer, this is actually a method, because it's accepting an argument, which is a location of a file. And this is also a method. So we have a method within a method in this circumstance. You can actually change values of objects kind of on the fly. If you want to, say you're setting setting the color for the car. If you wanted to say, just for demonstration purposes, and if we set car equal to color red. You can access the various pieces of this. So if we wanted to actually change the color, we say color is blue. You can do that right there. So what we're going to be doing actually is,
Sorry, I have like a question. I don't know if this is how it's defined, but like, why is it that you can assign new attributes or edit in the console on the right? And why don't you just do it? Like,
oh, right here.
Yeah.
So this is essentially just a little bit of a sandbox right here. If I wanted to, this would be, that's a good question. So if I clear this, if I actually cut and paste this into here, I can do the same stuff. So car, color. Right, so what this is this would be actually like a .js file that you can save. And this would be the console. So when you're working with the console is actually built right into your browser. So to work with the console, say for this map right here, if you right click and go to inspect, you can actually see the console right here. And this is the console that's interacting with our page. So the difference is like what we're writing in text wrangler would be, if you're using the replete, would be the stuff on the left. So this is just a document that's going to contain JavaScript that we can run. And then this would be kind of how you can test and develop and interact with it in the DOM. So the console is actually, you can think of the console as a DOM console that allows you, that essentially works in JavaScript, document object model console. So, for example, let's see, we have a document. I want to access different items in here. We don't have anything defined as that, but you can kind of dig through the content of your page using this. Or if you wanted to, you could create new items to play with. So this is actually really, really awesome for debugging. Say, for example, I'm working on my map, and it's actually that's a different one. Say, for example, I'm working on my map, and for some reason I'm not getting it to load because there's a typo in there now. If I hit go, it's going to tell me what it's not able to find. So this lets me know here that it's not able to find the tile at the location it's looking for. And that's because I actually have a typo in here. If I change that, it'll fix it. So your console is like your debugging master right here. Like Dennis, when you're working in D3, your console is going to be like your best friend.
Nice.
I think Luke's already learned that as well.
Yeah, for sure.
What's pretty fun about the console is you can get in and really edit any page that you want. Let's see, what's the headline on the Globe today? If you come in and say we want to edit this, just to test like things, you could say, so we can make up our own headlines if we want. It's a way that you can just kind of get into each page. If you refresh it, it's going to go back. What is this saying? Something about Baker. Baker touts his GOP gospel. His love of tacos. I don't know. It's just kind of a way, I mean, it's a way you can goof around, but just playing with the console here and playing with these developer tools is really powerful. And it's going to, you can toy with different colors. Right now, if we wanted to give this like, there we go. I wanted to give this like a different color. You could mess with it a little bit in there. You can kind of keep up here. If we were to do something maybe like, there we go. My computer's not cooperating with me. But you get the point. You can kind of get in and mess around with these, with pretty much any website. If you really want to freak out your friends, you can go in and change some headlines and send them a screenshot.
Yeah.
Telling you we're a headline featured in the Globe today. But yeah, the point of showing that to you guys is it's a really excellent debugging tool. One of the methods you notice on our map as is, if we wanted to set this up right now, we can double click and zoom in. You can view all of the methods in Leaflet. There we go. You can view all of the methods in Leaflet by looking at the docs here. So they're called properties in Leaflet at this point. If we wanted to, have it so here's some of the methods. If we wanted to set up Leaflet to not, right now when we double click, if we wanted to reset this. If we wanted to set this up, so when we double click, it doesn't actually do anything, we can disable the double clicking in that. We'll go back to run that real quick. It's no longer going to do that. So what we're doing here is we're accessing the double click zoom property of map. And then we're accessing the disable method of it. So all kinds of stuff you can do. JavaScript objects as data sets, and I'll probably end after this section because it's 4:30. Because the time kind of snuck away from us here, and I don't want to keep you guys. We have the room before 4:30 here. JavaScript objects as data sets. This is going to be, this is actually a really big concept when it comes to web mapping. In the Create a Basic Web Map session that we did last week, we focused on singular data points and feature groups. But you're often going to be adding larger data sets to your map. There is the three of you, you've probably heard the term GeoJSON before. A GeoJSON is a geographic data format that's held in JavaScript. So essentially, a JSON is JavaScript object notation. This might make a little bit of sense now. It's a JavaScript object, and this notation is just kind of a fancy word for our data set. It's a lightweight data interchange format that's easy for users to read and provides kind of a nice rigid structure for routines to parse. For example, here, if we wanted to save a variable as a JSON called directory, and say these are employees, we could then access different places in this employee record. So to show this in our Replit console, too much open. So, if we have a data set, really simple data set right here, if we wanted to print out directory, we could do that. How do you think I would go about accessing John's first name? I could say directory employees 0, because he's the first in the list, right? And then first name. So working with data in JavaScript, this is going to go for Reflit and D3 or any other data-driven format that you're working with. You use this nested fashion. So we save this as directory. As employees actually contains, this is like a little array. So each one of these would be an element of that array. So if you wanted 1, you grab that, or that would be 0, right?
Is this the same thing as a dictionary?
It's really similar to a dictionary. JavaScript and Python have a ton of commonalities.
Yeah, I was actually wondering why is it so similar, and what's the point of what's the main function for one versus the other?
JavaScript works on the web. JavaScript is what drives your browser, and Python is more of a server language.
Why can't you run Python?
It's just not the way that it's set up. That's a good question. I should dig into that a little bit further. I don't actually know, but I just know that JavaScript is the quote-unquote language of the web, and most browsers natively work with JavaScript. And they just, Python is kind of a language designed more for data management and data manipulation, whereas JavaScript is designed more for interaction and making calls to certain locations. JavaScript, it seems, has, I don't know, it's a great question. I'd be interested in digging into it a little you'll see, and this is what we're doing in the big data class, is we're using Python on the back end and JavaScript on the front end.
Why do we have to put the first name at the end of that code if I want to call John? Wouldn't be enough only to put directory.employees and then 0?
Not quite. So if we do directory dot employees 0, it's going to give us the whole first value in that part of the JSON, right? So using first name, we actually access the piece of that dictionary that we want. Does that make sense? So what you can actually set up is a loop if you wanted to, say, you wanted to print all the first, all of the names. We have this set up to refer to. Let me go grab it. So we wanted to iterate through our directory. We would set our directory right here. So we have our directory variable, our data equals directory. And then so for item and data, group of our data equals directory employees, right? So directory employees, what we get when we do directory employees right here. It's actually an array. It's enclosed by the square brackets. So now I'll run this piece right here. So this should say directory employees. And what this is going to do is going to loop through that array. Or if we just wanted those first names.
What's the console variable
Wait,
from? Console dot log.
that's the equivalent of a print statement.
Oh,
So console log is really useful. So what we could say here is maybe we wanted to put this somewhere in our script. We could say console log script is running, followed by something like script is finished. So what that will do is log that to the console when we run it. It's another nice way to debug. You can put in a console log in a part of your code that you don't think is necessarily, that you don't know if it's being run. And if it logs something, you'll know it's actually making it to that piece of code. Because the way JavaScript is going to generally work is going to be from document traversal or from top to bottom.
I see. Versus in Python, it runs everything. It's not.
Well, Python will do the same. Python will go 1, 2, 3, 4, down to your document. The only things that aren't going to run are things you hold in functions. But in Python, you would do, instead of console log, you would just say print script is running.
Is there a return equivalent in James?
Yep. And return is actually just return. Apparently apparently that's illegal.
So,
I thought it was, maybe I'm confusing these, but there, yes, you can. JavaScript return statement. Yeah. So if you were to set up, actually that's a good example. Let's just do it. Oh, I think I know why I didn't put this semicolon on there. But here, if we say this, run it, if we do my function, it'll return pi. So return isn't going to necessarily print something to your console unless you call it.
yeah.
But then, like this, you know how that works. Let's see, other good JavaScript stuff to keep it kicked off here. So, say this this GeoJSON data set. So we wanted to replace this and access some of the GeoJSON. So this is a GeoJSON versus a regular JSON. What do you notice about the GeoJSON? It's a little bit different here.
Lots of geographic.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually have geometry encoded right into the JSON. So this is a type, point, and coordinates. You can do this as line, polygon. Our properties are right here. This is our name, address, latitude, longitude. Well, that's basically that shouldn't be there. But it's essentially the same type of deal that we're working with. So, here's how I do that. So if I do that, if I do a similar thing in here, and I run this, if I do, let's see, coffee shops, it'll print that out. If I do coffee shops, features, one, that's our second one in there. Features one, you just kind of have to follow the tree.
For the GeoJSON objects, generally is this a type of convention that it's?
GeoJSON?
Yeah, I just kind of want to understand like how do we think about a GeoJSON as a geographic variable or a geographic object rather than like your typical object? Like what's kind of different about this?
So this is the GeoJSON specification page here. GeoJSON is a format for encoding geographic data structures. And the difference is it has a very rigid set library structure. So every single GeoJSON is going to have a type, geometry, properties. Anything within properties, you can have all kinds of them. Say you can have name, population, capital, all these different things like that. Type has to be here. It has to be, in geometry, it has to be a feature or a feature collection, I believe. Geometry has to be here. It has to be one of these types. So like point will tell it that this is a point. And essentially what this comes down to is it's just standardized. So people have written programs that know what to look for in the tree, and then they work with the numbers that they get from that. Does that make sense? So like leaflet, for example, is designed to read this standardized format. So like the code that creates a map in leaflet will look for a GeoJSON, or that creates a marker on your map in leaflet. We'll look for a GeoJSON and code it into a leaflet object that adds the marker. It's going to look for geometry, type, coordinates. And that's how it's going to know what to do, and it gives you this could be whatever you want it to be.
If you scrape like Google Maps data, is it just a bunch of GeoJSON data sets?
You know, I don't entirely know that Google Maps uses GeoJSON. I think they use something. I think they use a feature service, which is a different thing. They're in JavaScript API. This is like Leaflet, except it's Google Maps. Supports GeoJSON, looks like here. So here's a polygon feature. Those would be all the vertices of the polygon. Looks like they spelled out Google.
Why, for the example GeoJSON on the DUSPviz site, it has the same coordinates listed twice? Why is that?
That's a good observation here. These are in properties.
Yep.
So these don't actually need to be here.
Okay.
When Leaflet is reading it in, it's going to be searching through our JSON structure, saying, you know, whatever the name is, and then it's going to go to features, geometry. It's going to see the type, and if the type's a point, it's going to look for the two coordinates. So these are actually these ended up in the properties as kind of a duplicate when I made the data set. They don't actually need to be there. We could get rid of those if we wanted to. But we could also, I guess, this shows here, we can have a number held within here. This could be maybe employees, 13 or something like that. But that just kind of ended up by chance that it was in there twice. So yeah, are there any other big pieces here that I want to touch on before I set you loose? There might be, but we'll see. Let's see. I think, in interest of time, we'll wrap up there. Kept you guys a little later than I intended to already, but the goal of this Mapper's Introduction to JavaScript is to do exactly what we were just doing right here. Kind of talk about what JavaScript is, how it's used for maps. What we're doing here is we're using the Leaflet library to turn an element on our page, which is a div that we've given the ID of map into a map. And then we're using JSON data format to put that onto our map. If you continue through this, and I definitely very much encourage you to, we're going to talk about functions and event listeners. So ultimately, in the end, you'll be adding these coffee shops and looking at how you can activate. Sorry about that. You'll be adding these coffee shops. Okay. Adding coffee shops and showing how you can activate the buttons. And you can, what you do there is you use the layer, add and layer remove methods, and you just call those when you add a button. So say this button right here is called Show All Coffee Shops. We would set up we call it an add button. So Show All Coffee Shops will sorry, 1 second here. Our event listener would look like this. Document, get element by ID, add button. So this would go find the element with the ID add button, and we would add an event listener that will listen for a click. Then once it gets that click, it will run the add copy shops function. And I think there's actually a little typo in here again, my mistake. There should be a pound sign right in front of this because we're reading the ID, but I think it will work regardless because we're searching by ID. So,